Hi there. Today we're untangling the one topic that trips up almost every global investor who touches U.S. stocks when the market actually trades. U.S. equities do not move only during the New York regular session. There's also pre-market and after-hours trading around that core window. And when the U.S. switches daylight saving time, the open you converted into London, Tokyo, Sydney, or Dubai time quietly shifts by 1 hour. The same clock that said 2:30 p.m. in London can become 1:30 p.m. a few months later. Nail these three: the regular session, pre- and after-hours, and daylight saving, and overnight futures stop looking like noise. You start reading tomorrow's open gap with a clearer map. Let's walk the real clock times, one layer at a time. The New York Stock Exchange regular session opens at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time and closes at 4 p.m. Eastern. That is the home clock for S&P 500 NYSE cash equities. If you live in the United States, that window is simply your daytime trading day. If you are overseas, convert from Eastern, roughly 2:30 to 9 p.m. in London, winter, 10:30 p.m. to 5 a.m. next morning in Tokyo, and similar shifts for Sydney, Singapore, and Dubai. So a Monday regular session is always 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern, but on your local wall clock it may land in the evening, overnight, or early morning. Write your zone once and reuse it. Look at the SPY daily on screen. Each candle is one completed New York regular session. The cash S&P 500 day that global headlines mean when they say Wall Street closed. Why it matters. Overnight index futures keep repricing the U.S. story while cash is shut. When the regular open arrives, the cash market often gaps toward that overnight path, whether you are waking up in New York or logging in from another continent. If only the regular session existed, U.S. stocks would behave like a market that sleeps hard outside a fixed window. Reality is different. U.S. brokers also route pre-market and after-hours prints. The DST 100 chart on screen shows the regular day, 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern, but real trading often starts earlier and continues later. Pre-market is the window before the 9:30 a.m. Eastern open, commonly from about 4 a.m. Eastern for many retail platforms. Volume is often only about 5 to 10% of the regular session, so books are thin. After hours runs after the 4 p.m. Eastern close, often until about 8 p.m. Eastern on major platforms. Volume is thin again. But when a big earnings print or an FOMC rate decision hits, after hours can gap a stock like a coffee that jumps from $3 to $4.50 in one print. A large order into a thin book slips hard. That is extended hours risk, not a free gift. One more trap for anyone outside the U.S. Eastern Zone. The United States uses daylight saving time. Around mid-March, Eastern clocks spring forward 1 hour. Around early November, they fall back. It is the same move the clock 1 hour habit many U.S. households already know. What changes for you? In January, Standard Time, a London viewer often sees the U.S. open near 2:30 p.m. In April, daylight saving, that same open is nearer 1:30 p.m. exactly 1 hour earlier on the London clock. Tokyo and Sydney shift the same way. Rule of thumb: U.S. winter, roughly November. March use the standard time conversion. U.S. spring through fall, roughly March. November subtract 1 hour from that winter conversion. Miss the switch, and you will miss time entries every season, especially in the March and November changeover weeks. Recheck your broker's session notice before you trade live. Now, the practical edge, and it works whether you're a U.S. investor or trading U.S. names from overseas. Cash equities sleep after 4 p.m. Eastern. Index futures on the S&P 500 and the E-mini contracts keep trading through the night and across Asia and Europe. Look at the E-mini S&P chart on screen. If NVIDIA gaps higher after an earnings release and after hours, overnight futures usually reprice that shock long before the next 9:30 a.m. Eastern cash open. It feels like reading tomorrow's headline early. Overnight futures are the tape that absorbs Asian news, Europe opens, and U.S. after-hours prints while Cash SPY and QQQ are closed. When the cash open arrives, the regular session often gaps toward that overnight path and then digests the difference. Once you watch that pattern for a few weeks, the morning direction of the S&P 500 stops looking random. Here is a 5-point checklist to run before you actually trade U.S. stocks or U.S.-listed FS. 1. Confirm whether the U.S. is on daylight saving. Your local open time and how you read overnight futures changes with that 1-hour shift. 2. Know whether a name like SCHD or a mega-cap tech stock does most of its volume in regular hours versus pre-market or after hours. Enter a thin window and slippage can eat a coffee-sized edge. $3 of planned gain turning into a $4.50 fill against you. 3. Keep the overnight futures chart open, or not, from the prior cash close through the next 9:30 a.m. Eastern Open. Then compare the cash gap for real. iTraining beats theory alone. 4. Mark earnings dates and FOMC decisions on your calendar. Those are classic after-hours and overnight volatility bombs. 5. Write your stop and take profit levels before you click. Clock confusion is how people chase late or hold a loser through a session they never meant to trade. To trade U.S. stocks with a clear head, hold 3 ideas at once: the regular Eastern session, pre- and after-hours liquidity risk, and the seasonal daylight saving shift. Keep the SPY chart on screen and paint the timeline in your mind. When the daily candle closes at 4 p.m. Eastern, what overnight futures are doing, and what your local clock says at that same moment. When those 3 click, overnight futures stop looking like cipher. Next morning's cash gap on the S&P 500 starts to look like a readable pattern instead of a surprise. Global investors sit in a unique seat. The U.S. cash close to the next U.S. cash open is a long overnight window you can read through futures, Asia, and Europe. U.S. investors get the same overnight map before they wake up to the open. Use that window on purpose. This lesson is education only, not a trade call and not a promise of profit. Before live orders, recheck your broker's latest session hours and daylight saving notices, and remember, every trade is your responsibility. If this helped, a subscribe and like go a long way. Thank you.